to any normal, rational person, you would look at that as evidence. Now, I was not an Obama supporter, but you would at least think that, okay, well, we elected a black president. That's pretty good evidence that systemic racism is not an issue we have to worry about anymore. A black guy made it all the way to the top of the system. So clearly, this is systemic racism was not something we have to think about. Which of course it is evidence of that. But the race hustlers said, well, but we can't lose that. We can't lose that cudgel to beat people with. And so they had to actually ramp up.
This one, Matt Walsh sits down and has a conversation with Zuby over systemic racism. If you don't know, Matt Walsh made this movie recently called Am I Racist? And he kind of did a little tour, and he still is talking about that movie and some of the effects in society that we've seen. And particularly, this one is about the systemic race hustlers that kind of were born during the Obama era of police brutality. Zuby pushes back a little bit, bringing up the idea that seeing some of these events online could be part of the issue. But Matt Walsh is really good at staying on topic and brings the conversation back to the race hustlers. And I wanted to bring this one to you because as we move into Trump's second term, I want to see Americans of all types thrive and love their country again. And getting past racism is obviously going to be a huge issue because these race hustlers like BLM and even some of the Democratic leadership and the mainstream media that follow them like to use to divide us, keep us fighting with each other rather than focusing on the government that is self-serving and has lost sight of their job, which is to serve the American citizens and at the federal level, protect us within our own country and solidify strong borders. So let's have a look at this conversation of Matt Walsh talking to Zuby.
Yeah, exactly. I know I asked you this question when it came to what is a woman and as it pertains to the whole transgender ideology. But when it comes to this line of thinking and belief, what do you think it is that's so dangerous about it?
I think take your pick, really. I think that with this in particular, you have people that are intentionally trying to and successfully, in fact, succeeding in stoking racial guilt, resentment, suspicion, unhealthy obsessions. That's what they want to do because they profit off of it. And there's a lot of influence and power to be found in it. They have a vested interest in creating that sort of environment in society. I think if we got to a point where, I'm not saying we're going to get to some post-racial utopia. That's not going to happen. And so we have to be realists about it. And you're always going to have things like racism are always going to exist in the world. Because we're human beings. But if we got to a point in society where things were basically okay with the racial issues and most people weren't all that focused on it and we weren't going around every day talking about racism and if we got to that point, well, these people would be out of a job. Yeah. And more importantly, it's a tool of control and manipulation that's been taken away from them. And so they don't want that. Which is why I think, if you were to track sort of race relations in America, it seems like there was it's kind of a progression. Things are improving, through the 20th century to get to the 90s. 90s not perfect. I mean, you had OJ, you had race riots in LA, but it really seemed like things were getting better into the early 2000s, and then you get to Obama. And I'm certainly not the only person who's noticed that right around that time is where things started to go back the other direction. I mean, it wasn't long after Obama's into his second term when BLM popped up and all these things. Yeah. We started hearing about these alleged police brutality cases all the time, whereas before it was like every once in a while you'd hear. And I
think a lot of it is the rise of smartphones and social media as well, which came around that time. So everyone walking around with a camera and a video camera with them at all times. And then all of these things being on camera in many cases. I think that seeing something on video versus just hearing a story hits very differently for people in psychology. And I think it makes them feel like almost like they witnessed it themselves.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, this is, just an article that I'm reading.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that does play into it. You're right. Well, anytime you're dissecting any kind of cultural change or shift, it's impossible to overstate the influence of social media and smartphones. I mean, it just changed everything. It changes the way people interact. It changes everything about being a human in the world. I mean, because it's this kind of, this is a tangent, but it's a technology that really has no analog. There's nothing that existed like it before, because you could always say, well, cars changed the world. They did. But before that, there were horses, and cars are just a faster version of horses than they are. But with social media and smartphones, you can't really look back at something else and say, well, this is just a new version of that. It's really not. I mean, you had phones before, but you had nothing at all comparable to carrying something around in your pocket that gave you instant access to everything in the world, essentially. So anyway, that's part of it. But I also think that the Obama years contributed to this, because I think what happened was, you had these race hustlers who talked about systemic racism in America. America's systemically racist. Then we elect a black president, and to any normal, rational person, you would look at that as evidence. Now, I was not an Obama supporter, but you would at least think that, okay, well, we elected a black president. That's pretty good evidence that systemic racism is not an issue we have to worry about anymore. A black guy made it all the way to the top of the system. So clearly, this is systemic racism was not something we have to think about. Which of course it is evidence of that. But the race hustlers said, well, but we can't lose that. We can't lose that cudgel to beat people with. And so they had to actually ramp up their race hustling, in order to convince people that, no, yeah, we have a black president, but no, America's still racist. So they had to desperately grasp for other examples. And so that's where BLM comes from. And that's when we started hearing about all these police brutality cases that were not Michael Brown and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's one of the weirdest things that I've noticed is that in the past decade, I've heard the word racism and racist and the term white supremacy. I've heard them more in the past decade, certainly in the last 6-7 years, let's say, than at any other time in my life.
Most of us grew up in an era, unless you're, Gen Z or something like that, you remember comedians able to go up there and make jokes about, race and things like that and not be labeled racism. It wasn't even a thought, right? We were in this post-MLK era, and the race hustlers, as Matt Walsh is calling them, which I agree, hadn't moved to the forefront yet. And I will say, to Zuby's point, the fact that cell phones enabled so many people to have access to seeing some of these cases of police brutality could have been a detriment. It's also good in a way, because a lot of those people, I would hope, lost their jobs, and the police departments got a little bit cleaner as people were willing to film them, and then they started wearing body cameras and stuff like that. But the factor that he didn't mention was those that exploited those videos. These people were putting together all these collections of these videos so that they could feed them to you in an algorithm. And there was a time where none of us could go on YouTube or any of these places, Facebook or whatever, and not be bombarded with video after video of somebody being brutalized by the police one way or another, right? And I just can't help but wonder how much of this was funded by the USAID. The last few days have been a complete whirlwind as we find out more and more who and what entities USAID was funding and what they were actually up to. We do have the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday, and what do you know? The race hustlers are back at it as they're going to apparently play the Black National Anthem, which is really weird because the Star Spangled Banner, the United States National Anthem, is for everybody. So I don't know why they want to be divisive, other than to continue this type of race hustling rhetoric that Matt Walsh is talking about, right? And I've even heard that there's some boycotts going on over the Super Bowl as it pertains to this Black national anthem being played. But I will say that Elon Musk has just committed spending $40 million on 5 Super Bowl ads that's going to expose some of the information that Doge has discovered and some of these bad programs that have to do with our government. I'm really looking forward to seeing these commercials, and I think that everybody should watch. And I think that a boycott plan is probably to counter individuals from watching so that they aren't exposed to these commercials alone. But I don't know, that's just a theory. What are your guys' thoughts? Let me know in the comments. And with that, I think I'll wrap up there. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video in your group chat, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching to the end. I'll see you guys in the next video.